The Abbott investigates the use of Taser stun guns.
Taser, taser!
Every week, more police are trained to use Taser stun guns, and they're fired thousands of times in the UK every year without incident. But there have been high-profile cases where things have gone wrong.
Tasers were intended to be used in a hostile environment, not to taser a bloke who's half-blind shuffling along the street.
Figures published last week show the yearly use of tasers in England and Wales has more than doubled. But those figures are already out of date, which means the reality is anyone's guess.
I cannot imagine why it's necessary to take another 12 months to publish data which is looking in the rearview mirror. It seems astonishing.
In this week's report, we will examine how safe tasers are and whether they are more dangerous than the other ways of restraining people. And we'll meet a woman thankful for police stun guns.
I am really glad that they had the tasers with them. They handled it exactly as they should have done.
Police have used a Taser stun gun to subdue a man who was seen carrying knives outside Buckingham Palace. Witnesses say the man broke through a cordon as the changing of the guard was about to...
Police in Grimsby have used a taser in the arrest of a man and a boy who were reportedly obstructing trains near the town stations. The weapons, which delivers a powerful electric shock...
Armed siege at a house in Norwich has ended with 3 people being arrested. The police used a taser to stun a suspected gunman.
These are all cases where a taser meant a difficult situation was calmed and brought under police control. But there are times when things go badly, and it's those incidents that tend to stick in people's memories. Colin Farmer shuffles along using a white stick after a stroke 18 months ago left him partially sighted. He took me to the street in Chorley in Lancashire near his home, where he made the news last October.
I heard these voices shouting, "Police," you might have said taser unit or whatever, and I'm thinking, oh no, they've seen people down those steps waiting, and they're up to no good, they're warning them. So I just carried on walking. There was no further warning.
He was on his way to the local pub to meet some friends, but he never got there.
And I got shot at point blank range in the middle of my back. It's the most barbaric, inhuman thing you could ever imagine, because it's a violation of your body. And just having had a brain hemorrhage, I'm thinking I'm dying and there's nobody here to help me. There wasn't a soul around. I thought, I am being killed. I can't say goodbye. My mobile phone was in my pocket, and afterwards I found out that the mobile phone, touching the skin, it blew all the cells in it. I lost all my telephone numbers, I lost all my pictures in it.
Now Colin Farmer walks the streets even more gingerly, safely back inside and clutching the white stick he relies on to get around. He told me police had reports that night there were 2 men on the loose brandishing a samurai sword. In the dim light, it seems the police mistook his white stick for the sword.
I fell down face on the floor and my stick fell next to me. This policeman jumped out of the van, never spoke to me. I said, "I'm blind, what's he doing?"
Do you think there ever was anybody with a samurai sword?
It was never found. There never was one.
It's so bizarre. It seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it?
He saw me shuffling. Why didn't he at that point think, actually, this is an oldish guy. He's not the young lad we're looking for. He's obviously not heard us. I'll go and have a word with him.
Could it be that this is an unfortunate, nasty, terrible incident that's happened to you, but it's not an indictment of all taser use?
There is no excuse whatsoever for a taser to be used on a 63-year-old man shuffling along with a cane.
Colin Farmer has recovered well enough to tell his tale, and he's kept his sense of humour, even having a bolt of lightning tattooed on each forearm. The Crown Prosecution Service looked at his case, but decided there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute any officers. The Independent Police Complaints Commission told us it has made misconduct recommendations and is waiting for the force's response. Lancashire Police say they are determining the most appropriate course of action and won't comment any further. The IPCC is also investigating 3 cases of men who died this year after being tasered. The most recent is Jordan Begley. He was 23 and he was tasered in July after police were called to his home over a dispute with a neighbour. His death is also being investigated by the coroner. The cause of death is still not known. 8 other deaths we know of have been investigated between 2006 and 2011. None was found to be linked to the use of the taser. There may be others, but we can't be sure because those figures aren't compiled centrally. But there are still many who believe receiving a jolt of electricity, you're hit with 1200 volts, is never going to be safe. One man who does believe it's safe is Tony Bleetman, an A&E consultant who's been tasered voluntarily and advises the police on taser use.
I was foolish enough to be filmed twice on TV at the receiving end of a taser. It discharges a very high voltage current, but with a very low amperage in a rapid fire delivery of electricity over 5 seconds. And that current stays near the surface of the body, tends not to penetrate into the body, and I can tell you very clearly that it hurts. It is an unbearable deep pain. You are incapacitated throughout the discharge of electricity. But what I would say is that my experience has been that as soon as the current is switched off, I didn't experience any long-lasting effects. I was able to get to my feet, and all I wanted to do was to make sure that they didn't do it again.
But initially, it literally stops you in your tracks and makes you fall down.
It stops you in your tracks, you fall down, and it is overwhelming pain. You remain fully conscious throughout the episode.
Would you have it again? Having had it twice already?
I would try and avoid it. Looking at it and the fear of being exposed to it does fill me with a certain dread. It is horribly unpleasant, but tremendously effective.
I'm holding a taser now in my hands. It's bright yellow. Part of the undercarriage is red. It looks a bit like a toy gun. It's fairly light, lighter than my hairdryer, which is something I handle on a regular basis. But, of course, to use this, you need 3 days training and a thorough assessment. And this gun hasn't got its cartridge in, so at the end of it now you can just see 2 contact points. And, of course, if you pull the trigger, you'll hear the arcing as Sergeant Chris Turner is about to demonstrate.
Taser, taser.
And you can now see between the 2 points the currents arcing across, and it is quite dramatic. There's light between the 2 of them. Quite frightening, actually. Figures released last week show tasers are being used more often in England and Wales, with taser use doubling. In 2009, more than 3,000 a year were used. The most recent figures for 2011 show it was nearly 8,000. This includes just drawing a taser. They're only fired 1 in every 5 times. But these figures are already nearly 2 years out of date. We have no idea if taser use is still on the rise. The figures just haven't been compiled. Peter Nehru is the man who introduced tasers to the UK and envisaged their use being completely transparent.
It's one of my disappointments with the most recent release of taser data, which took the most excruciating length of time to come out, and is even so nearly 2 years out of date, which I think is frankly disgraceful. I cannot imagine why it's necessary to take presumably another 12 months to publish data which is looking in the rearview mirror. It seems astonishing.
He was the lead on tasers for the Association of Chief Police Officers in 2003, when tasers were introduced. The man responsible for expanding the use of tasers now is the current lead with ACPO, the Deputy Chief Constable of West Mercia Police, Simon Chesterman. Could the Home Office do more to support the police in getting these figures out more quickly?
Well, I think the Home Office, to a large extent, were a little bit constrained by the fact that they were moving from one recording system to another. They had to build a database, etc. And I think, if you understand the reasons for the delay, I think, the Home Office can't be held to blame for that. But it hasn't helped our situation. And I do know that there are plans to get the next round of statistics out, probably as early as next March. So we're heading in the right direction. But yes, it would help if the figures could go out regularly.
Do you think perhaps the lack of information about tasers is part of what has built up some public mistrust?
I think, there isn't widespread public mistrust, but clearly there are understandably public concerns. And the fact that we have not been particularly on the front foot in terms of getting the figures out there has not helped us, if I'm honest with you, you're right.
In rural Worcestershire, at the headquarters of West Mercia Police, I went to see tasers in action for myself at a taser training session.
Okay. What I want you to do, there's your taser over there. I want you to take charge of your taser, okay? Once you take charge of your taser...
The course includes classroom lessons and practical training on a firing range. It lasts 3 days with a 6-hour annual refresher. Compare that with firearms officers who get 6 weeks minimum with regular refreshers. The course ends in an assessment. Not everyone passes.
Hello, my friend. What's up? What's going on? Okay. Just calm yourself down and put the knife down. Okay?
In this scenario, PC Scott Harrow has come across a man in a car with a knife who is threatening to kill himself. The Force's Taser expert describes what's going on.
As he approaches the vehicle, the subject gets out of the car and continues to make aggressive nature's movements towards his wrist and his neck, and fearing for the fact that if Scott doesn't do something quickly and to disarm the man, potentially we've got some very serious life-threatening injuries taking place.
Just put the knife down. Come on, put the knife down. You have 50,000 bucks. Taser.
He's deployed Taser, and then from there he's been in a position firstly to control the subject, to make him safe, to neutralise the threat towards himself, and then from there they'll be in a position to offer first aid.
Again, don't do anything that's hostile that may make you use the Taser again. Do you understand?
I'm going to kill myself.
Okay, well, we'll get some help for you. We'll sort
We
that
need
out.
to ensure that whilst we're assessing Scott, that he's meeting all the standards required. These are national standards. If he doesn't meet the standards and he doesn't get the tick in the box and he doesn't pass the scenario,
You don't really have time to think about these guidelines when you're making these quick decisions.
you're certainly thinking about the training that you've been given. What we're actually looking at here is a good officer who's got a lot of experience policing in general, who is deploying good policing skills.
Okay, Scott, turn your cases to safe, take your cartridge off for us, put it on the floor, and holster up your Taser.
When a taser is drawn, a red dot will appear on whoever it's aimed at. This is often enough to stop people and calm the situation. Sergeant Chris Turner from West Mercia Police showed me exactly how it works.
You'll notice that on the wall now I've turned it on, there's a red dot there. Where the red dot goes is where the top probe within the cartridge will go on the body. And we're looking at the point of aim being round about the sternum, so away from the heart and major organs, okay?
How accurate is it?
It is very accurate. It will go up to 21 feet. Once the trigger is depressed, the probes themselves, with an accurate deployment, will go into the subject.
When the probe enters the body, the high-voltage electric shocks freeze the muscles so you fall over. Taser is a brand name, but all the stun guns used in the UK are made by Taser International. Officers we spoke to on this course said carrying the bright yellow weapon makes them feel safer.
From the 1st of October, our geographic areas are expanding. I think we are going to be sometimes on our own. So I think if I have the Taser available, it gives me another option.
How often do you imagine you might actually have to use your Taser?
I would like to say not at all, but if I need to, I know I've got the confidence that it's there for my safety, my colleagues' safety, the public safety, then it's there.
The Police Federation now says it wants all officers to carry Tasers. So how did we get here in the space of just 10 years? Tasers were introduced as a trial in 5 police forces in 2003, initially just for firearms officers. Peter Nero, the former Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, was responsible for bringing them across the Atlantic from America, where they were already in regular use. It was against a background of fatal shootings by police in the UK that he began to look for alternatives to firearms. What else did you look at the time?
Oh, a whole range of stuff, some of which was exciting and exotic. Things that the Americans had developed in Vietnam War protests, things that they'd tested out in Somalia that the American Marine Corps had used, which under no circumstances would you let loose on civilians in the UK.
What were they?
Things like sticky glue and various forms of sonic disruption. We're just simply never, ever going to meet the test of proportionality acceptability.
So what made you finally decide Taser was the one to go for?
Because critically what was required was a device that could incapacitate somebody who presented a serious threat and do so at a distance, like more than arm's length from an officer. So finding a solution that did that reliably and also had a very low threat of causing serious harm to the offender was sort of two of the critical things.
The trials of Tasers in 2003 were deemed to be successful, and 5 years later, Tasers were given to specially trained officers outside of the firearms units. Peter Nehru, now a criminologist at Cambridge, oversaw this as head of the National Policing Improvement Agency.
It was extremely important that each individual force looked at assaults on police and their risk assessment process and matched the deployment to the risk. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, there's clearly a substantial difference between, for example, West Midlands and Greater Manchester and Dyfed Powys and Devon and Cornwall. It has to be matched to risk.
Some of those who've lost loved ones after being tasered are never likely to accept the police have got the balance right. Barbara Hodgson's brother, Brian Lone, died after being tasered twice at his home in Sacriston in County Durham. The police were called and a siege developed after reports he was armed and was threatening his girlfriend in the house.
Obviously knew he had a samurai sword because he had obviously threatened the girlfriend with it, but he never actually used it. Why didn't they just go across and spray him with a pepper spray or something?
You think that would have
You know
been
what I mean?
better?
Well, of course it would have been. I would have been alive today if they had it done. And they could have easily have arrested him, very easily. He was only about 5'8", weighed about 11 stone. No, they could have easily overpowered him.
3 days after being tasered, Brian Lone died. An inquest ruled that it was from natural causes, undiagnosed heart disease. A pathologist said one of his arteries was so narrow it was the size of a pinhole. This happened back in 2006. But even today, Barbara can't believe tasers weren't connected to his death.
Brian was so fit and healthy. Very, very fit and very healthy. And then they said he had a coronary heart disease when they'd done a post-mortem. I think the tasers have made it look like a coronary heart disease.
The inquest ruled, though, that he did die of natural causes.
So how can you believe that when he was so fit and healthy? He was fine until the day he was shot with the tasers. It's just so heartbreaking.
Durham police told us
neither the family nor solicitors representing them made any complaint at the time concerning the actions of officers involved in his arrest. After investigation, it was determined there was no misconduct case to answer for any officer. The circumstances were the subject of coroner's inquest, where it was determined Mr. Lone died from natural causes, with no evidence to link his death with the actions of the officers.
So is there any way that being tasered could bring on a subsequent heart attack? What do the medical experts say? Hospital consultant Tony Bleekman.
In any exposure to electricity in which a subject undergoes cardiac arrest, one would expect that to happen fairly quickly or almost instantaneously after exposure to the electricity, with a diminishing risk over the subsequent few hours. And that's what we see with industrial domestic accidents. So one would logically expect that if the taser were to interfere with the cardiac function, one would expect that to happen pretty quickly.
So who is assessing how safe tasers are? It's a rather mysterious scientific committee which reports to the Home Office and the MOD. We asked for a list of members, but were told it's not up to government to divulge the committee's composition, though we do know who chairs it. We have come across 2 members of the committee, but they told us they're not supposed to identify themselves. And the ACPO lead on tasers, Deputy Chief Constable Simon Chesterman, doesn't know who they are either.
I know who the chair is, but other than that, I don't know the membership of that particular panel. But I'm reassured that through government, they are carefully selected and independent.
The problem is, because we don't know, even you have to take that reassurance at face value. You can't assess it for yourself, as indeed the public can't.
I'm 100% confident that they are acting independently of any influence from the manufacturer or indeed any influence from the police, who may wish to influence them to say things in order to encourage us to carry more tasers. So in some ways it's a positive, the fact that we're not in a position to influence them at all.
What the committee doesn't do is assess the safety of tasers compared to other forms of force the police can use, like CS spray, dogs or the truncheon. And there have been cases of people dying after police use CS spray, something all officers carry. We can't say how many because, again, the figures aren't compiled. But cases we found that the IP has investigated said there was no link between the CS spray and the deaths. Tony Bleekman, the medic advising police on taser use, says we need to know how tasers compare with the other types of force the police have.
There are now efforts to collate this nationally so that we have a picture overall about police use of force, what they use, the effectiveness, the injury rate. And I think when looking at any use of force, one needs to bear in mind that it is being used to effect an arrest, prevent further injury or further damage, and to bring a conflict situation to an end. And I think that the police in this country have taken a very sensible approach to this and recognising that any use of force, be that a baton or a police dog or CS spray or rigid handcuffs or a firearm, each use of force carries a risk of injury both to the officer and to the subject.
But we don't know how that risk differs with each method used. The ACPO lead on tasers, DCC Simon Chesterman, says reporting the different use of force figures across 43 constabularies was dropped as part of a bureaucracy-busting exercise.
My view, personally, is that we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater and we should be in a stronger position to defend ourselves in terms of use of force. Use of force, when compared with the number of encounters that police have with the public and the level of violence they're dealing with, is absolutely minuscule.
So you think it should happen. Why isn't it going to happen?
It's very difficult sometimes. It's like herding cats. trying to get 43 forces on side and recording something consistently in the same way. And I think any support that we can get from government and the Home Office to make that happen, it would be very welcome.
The Home Office Minister and the Policing Minister declined to be interviewed for this programme. The Home Office did send us a statement saying,
"The Home Office and the police have rigorously tested tasers, and independent medical assessments have concluded that the risk of serious or life-threatening injuries is low. They are only used by officers who have been carefully selected and trained and in situations where there is a serious threat of violence. There have been no reported serious injuries or deaths in the UK directly linked to their use."
But there is still opposition to more police being issued with tasers. The Metropolitan Police has introduced 24-hour, 7-day-a-week taser response vehicles in every London borough. This is on top of 1,500 taser-equipped officers. This is a youth centre in Hackney, and this is one of the boroughs where there will be 24/7 patrols of police with tasers. And I've come here to talk to some of the youngsters. This is a busy place. Just through that door, there's some youngsters body popping and doing dancing. There's table tennis, people with computers. But I'm going to talk to the youth leader, Emeka Ebwano.
The relationship between young people and the police is already at a boiling point. Anything that kicks off now will probably blow things out of proportion even more. Before you know it, somebody could end up getting tasered, and it's the long-term effects that can have that nobody's really sure of yet. And so that's what we're worried about. I've spoken to people who have been tasered before, and they said that it's changed the way that they feel about the police and how they feel about themselves as well.
This expansion is now being challenged in the courts, and here they've had meetings with the police to try to persuade them not to go ahead with the extra taser patrols.
The relation between young black people and police officers itself, them holding tasers, I don't think that's a good mix, to be honest with you.
They have got guidelines that they are supposed to follow, where they're supposed to only use it when it's proportionate and when it's needed as a deterrent.
There's loads of other guidelines that they're supposed to follow, like the stop and search, but they still stop people randomly and come up with any excuse under the sun. So if they're doing that, then there's nothing stopping them from using tasers.
They used it more to their power, then it kind of acts as a deterrent, but then that kind of emphasises the gang war between the police and the young people, which doesn't kind of build the barriers, it just makes it worse.
The Met told us it carefully considered issues of public and officer safety in its decisions, and officers always have to justify their taser use. Those youngsters fear the tasers, but while making this programme I talked to one woman who believes tasers saved her life. Zoe was relieved police had them when they were called to the hospital where she was being treated.
I picked up a bowl and I actually threw it at the wall and it smashed into a few pieces, one of which I picked up. It was quite a sharp piece. The sound of the bowl smashing sort of brought a lot of the staff into the room. I was saying to people that I was going to kill them.
Zoe has suffered psychotic episodes for the last 20 years, but says this was the worst she's had. She was sectioned by police on the street after threatening people with a knife. The next morning, when she woke up in hospital, she was still feeling paranoid. That was when she armed herself with the piece of crockery. Police were called as she began attacking the walls and door.
I found their presence very intimidating. At one point, I actually did walk towards one of the police officers holding the sort of shard in my hand and saying that I was going to kill him too. That was the point that he actually pulled the taser out on me. It was very scary. It was the one thing that actually really did sort of make me stop and think. Basically, as soon as he pulled it out, I had a red dot appear on my chest from the taser, and I actually thought in the state of mind that I was in that I had a gun pulled on me, and it shocked me so much, even though I was sort of very unaware of what I was doing, and I did step back from the police officer when he did that.
Although it made her step back from the police, it didn't make her drop the crockery shard.
I actually put the piece of crockery to my throat as if to harm myself, and at that point the police officer pulled the taser on me again and told me that I needed to take it away from my throat straight away or he would taser me. I began to listen a little bit more, and eventually I did actually put the piece of crockery down onto the ground.
The police were then able to overpower her and she was taken to a segregation unit. 8 weeks later, she's undergoing treatment in the community and feels much better. But taser use against mentally ill people is controversial, with charities like Rethink and Mind concerned that it seems to be happening more often. Solicitor Sophie Khan is representing several people who were tasered in wards while they were suffering mental illness.
I think it's appalling that the police have to use a taser on someone who's mentally ill, knowing that they may not understand what the police officer is saying, and it's something that we don't want to see anymore. I don't want to see anymore. But I do get cases even now from people whose family members have been tasered in hospitals. I mean, those cases, they will, I think, shine a very bad light on taser use.
But Zoe is convinced bringing tasers to the hospital where she was being treated was the best thing that could have happened.
I am really glad that they had the tasers with them. Had they not had the tasers, perhaps they would have tried to restrain me physically, but I think that it would have been a very dangerous situation all round, really, for the police and for myself. I think the police were actually very professional and they handled it exactly as they should have done. And there was a positive outcome, really, for both them and for me. We all got away without any injuries, and I think the situation was dealt with very well.
Zoe's story isn't the kind to hit the headlines. It's usually when things go wrong. That and the gaps in our knowledge are fueling distrust of tasers. We don't have details of who has medical oversight of the use of tasers. We don't know exactly how many tasers are being used by the police. Nor do we know how the safety of tasers compares with CS spray, batons, or setting dogs on suspects. Even so, Deputy Chief Constable Simon Chesterman says he knows what he would prefer.
If you stood me in the middle of this room now and said we're going to send a burly police officer into the room who's going to strike you as hard as they can around the knee joint with their baton, or alternatively we'll set a police dog on you, or alternatively we'll send a fully trained taser officer in here to taser you, which would you have? Then I'll have the taser any day, thank you.
It's not an attractive choice though, and until we have up-to-date information about how often tasers are used and the risk of that use compared to the other options the police have, the stun gun is likely to remain in the dock.